During this section, I want to talk about data validation within an Excel list. Now, this is a very important concept, so before we jump in and get our hands dirty and start to work with the various data validation tools that Excel carries, I want to talk about the need for data validation. Understand why this is important before we start to implement it. And this will hopefully open up some doorways for us in understanding why this is important and how we should be implementing this within our Excel lists. So a while ago, I was doing a training at a company, very specific group. They had a very specific need. Here's what happened. This company had, prior to me arriving, had sent out to a third-party company the need to create surveys for their clients. This third-party company said, great, we're going to create the surveys for you. We'll send them out to your clients. We'll collect the data. We'll send the data back to you, and you can do your reports based on that data. Well, here's the problem. That third-party company that created the surveys, they sent them out. The clients filled the information out. When the data came back in to be reported off of, they found out that there was zero validation on the data being collected within those surveys. Which meant when people were putting things in like their phone numbers, they were typing in their phone numbers all sorts of ways. When people were putting date values in, they were formatting their dates and numbers and text and using different symbols, and it was just wacky with the results that were coming back from these surveys. It was a hassle. So now when the data came back and people wanted to report off this data, it was nearly impossible. They had dirty data. They got dirty data into the system. They got dirty data out of the system. So they weren't able to effectively report off of this data. Before they can create the reports, somebody had to go back in and clean the data up. So the training that I got involved with, what we talked about how we can validate the data so that when somebody's inputting their results, their data, we're telling them, hey, you did it wrong. Fix that. Format it the right way. Ooh, that's not a valid value. Make sure you pick something from this list that we're supplying you. You gotta pick a valid value and you gotta format it the way that we want it to be formatted. Take a look at what I have open in front of you. This is the example file that, again, comes with this course. So once again, if you haven't downloaded it, go back to lecture number 2 and download the file called Excel 102 Exercises. This is the one that we use throughout all of this course. So open in front of you, I've got the example file and I've got sort and filter here. So think about the concept that I've just described to you. We need clean data. We need to make sure that people are putting correct data into our list here so that later on when we sort or filter or summarize, we're doing it based on clean, effective data. So what's something you might validate inside of a list like this? Well, if it's me that's going to work inside of this list, you might want to give me specific makes or models that I have to choose from. Because if it's up to me and I'm just down here entering new records, I'm probably going to mistype something. I'm a horrible, horrible speller. Okay? I blame it on technology. I use Word to do my spell checking, which is great, but now I can't spell. Okay? So don't rely on users to type stuff in correctly. I might misspell Oldsmobile or Cutlass Supreme, right? Give them choices to pick from. Ooh, if it's an automatic, if it's a smoking car, if it's a convertible, if it's insured, they're just Y and N results, yes and no's. That's all you can pick. It's not maybe. Maybe it's a convertible. I don't know. Well, no, it's a yes or a no. Okay? So we give them clear-cut direction. Tell them exactly what they need to do. You can only pick from these makes or models. You can only use N and Y's for the 4 columns there. Ooh, rates. Rates can only be from this minimum value to this maximum value. So we can set up these types of data validation techniques within Microsoft Excel. So we're going to take a look at how to incorporate this and get clean data into your list. And ultimately, when you start sorting, filtering, summarizing, pivot tables, you're going to be able to do it effectively because you've got consistent data inside of your Excel lists. So jump into the next lecture. Let's take a look at how you can validate your data within a list like we're looking at. So now that we understand the need for data validation, let's take a look at creating data validation. So I'm still using the same example file, and I'm on the worksheet called Sort and Filter. Now, the validation that I want to show off here that I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to work with the Make column. So as people are editing records, adding new records into this list, I want them to only be able to pick from a predefined set of makes. And that's it. Nothing else. Well, before you can apply validation to a list, you got to select the cells that you want to apply the validation to. So for me, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to grab from A4, and I'm just going to grab a few rows down below. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'll grab down to B30. So that's the group of cells from B4 down to B30 that I want to apply the validation to. If this was real world and I anticipated that this list was going to grow several hundred or thousands of records, you'd want to grab all of those rows that you're going to apply the validation to. Anticipate how big your list is going to get. So now that I've got the rows selected or the cells selected, I'm now going to create my validation. So I'll go up to my Data tab, top of my screen. Inside the Data Tools section, I'm going to go to Data Validation, and I'm going to create Data Validation. All right, this opens up my data validation window. Remember, in the background, I've got a group of cells selected. So my settings or validation criteria for that group of cells, I'm going to allow not any value, because that's opening up the doorway for people to input incorrect data. So I'm not going to allow any value, but I'm going to allow one of these validation criteria techniques. And for me, I'm going to use a list. I'm going to tell them they can only pick from a predefined set of makes, a list that I'm about to create here. So for my list, I'm going to bring up a source. I'm going to say you can pick from Chevy, and you separate them by commas. So I'm going to say Chevy, comma, Ford, comma, Pontiac. Oh, let's make sure I spell that right. Pontiac, comma. What else do we got there? We got Dodge. All right, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to leave off Oldsmobile for a moment, okay? Because I want to show you something here. But in reality, Oldsmobile might be a correct value, but I want to show you what happens if it's not a part of the list. So Chevy, Ford, Pontiac, Dodge, all separated by commas. That's your validation criteria. That's your list. That's what people can pick from now. So I'll hit OK. And now, let's imagine I want to put in a new record here. So I'm going to say this is number 100. I tab over. I've now got a drop-down arrow where I can pick from the valid makes. So I'll grab Ford, tab over, here's a Mustang, and so on. Now let's say I get down here and here's record number 110, and I jump over here and I say, we're going to have a Porsche. Right? There's Porsche. Well, Porsche wasn't one of the 4 makes that you could choose from. I'll hit my tab key. Oh, and now I get an error. Hey, the value entered is not valid. A user's restricted the values. Okay, so I can retry, I can cancel. If I retry, I can try typing something else in there, go to the drop-down menu. If I cancel, it'll just drop what I did. So I have to pick from the valid section. Here's a Chevy. Now remember earlier, Oldsmobile, that was in my original list, and it's not barking at me. It's not saying, hey, whoa, that's an incorrect value, right? Well, that's because it was already in the list. So it's not validating that one at this point. But take a look at this. I'm going to go back to my data tab. I'll go back to data validation, and I'm going to say circle invalid data. And now it's telling me, ooh, Oldsmobile and Chrysler are 2 invalid values that you have in here, existing data. So not only can you validate new data that's coming into the system, but you can also jump into here and find any errors within existing data. So try this out. It's really simple. Data validation. Highlight the group of cells that you want to validate, whether they're old records or new records or a combination of new and old. Go up to your data tab, data validation, and create a list validation. Do the makes. Try out this example right here that I've just given you. Or try out the model. Try out the auto, smoke, and convertible and insurance. Whatever you want. Make up something of your own. But try adding data validation. You're going to thank yourself in the end because you're going to get consistent, clean data into your system so that when you go to report on it later, you get that same consistent clean data out of your system as well. So I love the idea that we can validate our data. Again, get clean data in because we're validating it as the users are inputting the data, which means we get clean data out of the system as well. Now, we noticed earlier when you input something that does not comply with the validation, for example, if I come back down here and change this from Chevy to Porsche, hit my enter key or tab key, whatever, I get an error message. Now this is the default error message that comes out of the Excel validation tool. And all it says is, hey, the value entered is not valid. A user's restricted the values. Well, great. Us, as the developer of the validation rules, we can also specify our own custom errors. This way we can perhaps get a little more explicit and descriptive to our users. Or we can have a little fun with our users and give them some wacky error messages that they can interpret themselves. Well, either way, we can create our own custom errors. Take a look. So first step, I need to select the cells that I'm validating. So for me, I'm going to go from B4 down to B30. That's the same group of cells that I did in the previous lecture when I created the drop-down list, the custom validation. So with that selected, I'll go back to data, back to data validation, back to data validation again. And this time, you can see I still have my settings in there, my list with those 4 options. I'm going to go over to the error alert tab. On the error alert tab, I can see that it is going to show an error after invalid data is entered. But remember, it's the default one. So I'm going to create my own. First, I'll give it a title. I'll just call this car make. That'll be at the top of the error window, kind of like it says data validation up here. But we'll get car make on ours. And our error message. So this will be the error that gets spit out to the user when they do something wrong. So I could be really silly about it, and I could say something like, try again. You know? Ta-da, and that's it. Or I can say, you bonehead, you did it wrong, or whatever. Or I can get a little more descriptive with the user. I can say something like, let's see, I'll say you entered an incorrect make. Please select a valid make from the drop-down menu. Yada, yada, yada. Really explain it to them. So I read this quote once, and I can't remember who said it. I think it was just actually something thrown out on a social media page somewhere that talked about validation of data like this, or creating systems for users to work in and input data. You want to make it as simple as possible. You essentially want to do the work for them. They input data, validate it all right there, explain to them what they did wrong, write exactly what they did wrong so that they can fix it, and they're not sitting at your desk while having you do it, or you're not holding their hand. Help them out as much as possible. So if I hit OK, I'm going to hop back out here. Let's try putting something there that doesn't exist. I'll say Porsche once again, hit my enter key, and now I've got my custom error. You entered an incorrect make. Please select a valid make from the drop-down menu. Okay, I'll retry, and now I go to the drop-down. Oh, retry. Let's get rid of that. Go to the drop-down, and I can pick something valid. So customize, not only add the validation, but help your users out. Explain to them exactly what they did wrong and what they need to do, the steps that they need to do to fix the problem. If you don't describe to them what they need to do, the next thing you know, you're going to have a line at your desk, people asking you, hey, I'm getting an error. What's going on here? How come I can't put Porsche in here? Well, now I got to explain to each individual person at my desk what's going on. So tell them out. Tell them right there. Custom error. Select the range of cells. Go to data validation, and do your custom errors. So we got one more topic that I want to get into here that deals with validation. And this isn't so much validating input of records into a list, but we're going to make more dynamic or a more dynamic interface to work with formulas. So I traveled back in time here. I've gone back to the list functions worksheet that we worked with in the previous sections when we were talking about list functions. And I've still got all the work here that I created earlier. Now what I'd like to do is modify my different categories here. What is this? Cells H4, H7, and H10. I want to create drop-down menus so somebody could jump into here and just through a couple clicks of the mouse, change the category from software to one of our other categories and update the calculation. Now I'm going to use the same technique that we just got done talking about, utilizing validation list to create these 3 separate drop-downs. But I'm going to throw in a little bit of a difference in here, something that we did not see in the previous lectures. Okay? This deals with how you create your list. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scroll off to the right, just someplace empty, maybe this end column, and I'm going to create a list of the valid categories. So we'll say we got software, we got copying, we got rent, and I'm forgetting what else we got over there. Let's see, we got overhead, supplies, and so on. We got a few more over there. We got miscellaneous, advertising, technical support. I'm going to put one more. Let's say we got technical support. And I'm going to stop right there. Ideally, we'd make the entire list over here of each of these unique values. But by just limiting it right here, we're going to get the point, what's happening. So this list I'm going to use to create the drop-downs that the users can pick from for the different categories. All right, now that I've got the list of valid options, I'm now going to select these 3 cells, that H4, H7, and H10. And I just held down my control key and clicked on all 3 of them. So now with that selected, I'll go up to my data tab. I'm going to go back to data validation. I'm going to do settings. And once again, I'm not going to allow any value, but I'm going to tell them they have to pick from a list. And my source, rather than this time then typing it in, I'm going to go select my list over here. What is that? N3 to N8. And that's it. I'll hit OK. And I've now got little drop downs. So I go from software to copying, and I've updated my formula through a nice dynamic drop-down list. So I'm trying to create something that's more user-friendly, intuitive, right? Just through a little drop-down. You've now got these dynamic calculations or dynamic input and interaction with these calculations. Now, what if I add another value over here? Like I jump over to N7 or N6 and I press Control plus on my keyboard or right click insert. Let's just insert one here. Oh, I'm going to have to right click and I'll insert a row. And I insert something else here. Let's say we get contractors, the one that I didn't have before. All right, contractors, there it is. I hop back over to my drop downs and look at that. I've now got contractors. So this dynamic little interface that users can now get into to be able to update these dynamic calculations. And all I'm using is a validation list. Try this out. Open up the exercise file, jump back to list functions. If you didn't create the calculations earlier because you didn't go through the previous section, make sure you do that. Or create some calculations that you can then feed in a value from a validated list.